Welcome back to the 298th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories all about Tim Walz. And this is not really, how should I say, it's not a surprising pick, but it's definitely taken some people by surprise. It's made other people really happy. We're going to go through all the different stories about it from all different sides, the political middle, the left, the right, and we're going to get a full picture of this new vice presidential candidate. And, of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, did you know who Tim Walz was? Before any of this VP shenanigans, this Veep stakes was going on, obviously we had Veep stakes for Donald Trump, and he chose J.D. Vance, which people didn't really see coming. Now we have Kamala Harris also choosing someone who people didn't really see coming, and I'm not going to say that they're on the same level of unknown because J.D. Vance was at least popular, but Walz is definitely very unknown unless you're from Minnesota. And before any of this was going on, maybe you got a little bit of rumblings about a few things he said here or there. His name only really got thrown in for the contention when he was out there doing the media tour for the position, basically, and came up with the, the wording or the messaging that Kamala Harris has been using very frequently here, which is the Republicans just kind of feel weird, and it really did stick. Now, I'm sure that's not the only reason that she picked him, and actually, I'm not going to spoil anything. I just want to know, put it down in the comment section, what you think, where he came from. Is he actually a good VP candidate? There are going to be lots of opinions today, so put yours down there before they are influenced by a whole bunch of these articles. So our first one comes from Politico with the headline, Why Kamala Harris Chose Tim Walz. And Tim Walz is definitely not the candidate or the Veep candidate that you would pick if you're trying to completely redefine yourself as Kamala Harris. We're actually going to go into the last article that comes from the New York Times that the author makes that sort of argument. And I hadn't really thought about it until he said it, but it's really true because a lot of the positions, they're very similar on things. The only thing that's different is he's from the Midwest. Well, there are lots of things that are different, of course, but the main things are he's from the Midwest, whereas she's from the coast, and she is a black woman and he is a white man. So I think those are the main differences. On border policy, they're pretty similar. On labor policy, you don't really get much inklings from them. Then again, if you want to really cast her old image as a hardline prosecutor that she's trying to bring back for this campaign versus her during the 2020, 2021 riots and his record during that time, they're pretty similar there, at least what they were trying to get across, which is the social justice kind of politician. Now she's kind of recasting herself a little bit. So while she's trying to go to the moderate side, she can have somebody that really embodies some of the progressive values to appease the progressive base. But at the end of the day, if you've been following her for long enough, if you've been following the battle for VP and president for long enough, then you know that she's really not that moderate. And I'm not just trying to slam her. She was. During her time in California, hardline prosecutor, some Republicans would have definitely voted for her. She definitely switched and moved in a different direction as she went into the Senate. As we know, she had one of the most progressive voting records. That was from GovWatch and actually got taken down after she had announced, or at least I say it got taken down. We had noticed that it was taken down after she had announced that she's running for president. But obviously, nobody's sitting there like, oh, is GovWatch taking down this claim from during the time when she was running for president and she was on the VP ticket? No. For all I know, it could have been taken down a year ago. But it was taken down, and everybody started to notice at the time when she announced for president. And now she's trying to redefine herself. She's trying to move away from that voting record in the Senate, the things that she said, especially about fracking, that she said raised her hand about on the debate stage about immigration. She's trying to move the needle on those sort of things and say, whoa, no, not true. That was just a momentary lapse. I'm actually falling back into my old kind of centrist, or at least close to the center ways, at least in California. And then, guess what? That's going to alienate some of the progressives who are really happy to have her on the ticket. It's actually really interesting when you look at the overall game that was being played when Joe Biden was dropping out, who was behind him almost all the time? Who had his back? It was the progressives. It's probably because they thought that he was a very good mouthpiece for them, that he was willing to sit down and actually listen to them because he knew that they were a pretty large coalition, and he thought at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders, AOC, they have their finger on the pulse, that people are willing to listen to him, so they were kind of backing him. But I also think it may have been they were backing him because also they know that if he did step down, they wanted to seem like they were unified around his administration, and guess who's part of that? Kamala Harris. Now, that's a little bit of extra speculation for me, but that also moves the needle from Tim Walz to Kamala Harris. So let's get into Tim Walz. Quote, Kamala Harris loved Tim Walz's governing record in Minnesota. His biography and record of winning tough races resonated with her. And most of all, she just really liked him. Quote, the Minnesota governor and vice president sat down for a one-on-one interview Sunday and connected. Despite having little relationship prior to the vice presidential selection process, according to two people close to the process granted anonymity to discuss private conversations. So she actually had a whole bunch of different sit-downs, and there were three main ones. One was for Mark Kelly of Arizona, one was for Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and the other one was for Tim Walz of Minnesota. And the Shapiro camp thought that they came away from it a little bit, feeling a little bit weird is probably the best way to put it. It was, the team felt that, we didn't really get the message across. They actually did a follow-up email/call in order to reassure certain things and also talk about the fact that how he's maybe not 100% there yet because he doesn't want to leave behind his state. So I think that he walked into that meeting thinking, hey, there's a good chance here. He walked out saying that meeting didn't go so well, and then he sent a follow-up afterwards saying, well, while I'm very happy to have sat down with you, I do still want to run my state, and I still have to consider that because Pennsylvania needs someone like me. If we're pretending that he's, that arrogant, or, believing the fact that he's probably that arrogant and that he thinks that Pennsylvania needs him right now. And with him in there and not necessarily going that well, I think Mark Kelly was kind of a formality. It's really interesting if it was, so I'm going to run a hypothetical here. If Josh Shapiro was knocked out from that whole situation and it was left to Mark Kelly versus Walz, you heard the Kamala Harris team talk about possible refocus on the Sun Belt, focusing on your Georgias, your Arizonas, and trying to bring these states back into the fold, even though it had seemed for quite some time that it was really going to be the blue wall states up north that they had to worry about, your Pennsylvanias, your Michigans, your Minnesotas, so on and so forth. And, your Wisconsins. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, so maybe Mark Kelly actually makes a little bit of sense. Maybe he is the person that brings in that Arizona that's a little bit purple right now, and she can really go into Georgia and spend more time there on this flipping the Sun Belt strategy if she can get Arizona on lock. And then going to Tim Walz, which, remember, Minnesota has not voted red in a very, very long time. It was the only state that Reagan was not able to flip when he had his huge landslide. So at the end of the day, does it really make any sense? It's not really a battleground state. It's kind of part of that blue wall, but it doesn't mean that it's actually a battleground state. It just raises some questions in a lot of people's minds. And then I read the Politico article, and I was like, and I said, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. They just vibed, which, I'll be honest, if you're going to be the president, if you think that you have a good chance at it and that this person that you're putting on your ticket is going to be the vice president, you basically have to have a weekly lunch with them, then do you really want to hate this person? Or do you want to have somebody that you can actually work with? Also, she does not have executive experience while he does. She was a senator and she was a DA. She's never been a governor of a state. She's never been the president herself. Even as vice president, she may get some understanding of what the executive office is like, but that doesn't mean that she's making all the critical decisions and actually being the person that everybody has elected into that position and has vested all the power in. And Tim Walz is that person. That's why it was mainly coming down to governors. That's probably why you could say Mark Kelly was completely out of the running, because he doesn't have that executive experience. That's why I keep saying Ben Ben Shapiro. They're not related. That's why Josh Shapiro was most definitely at the top of the list, because he was a governor and because he was in a battleground state. And Tim Walz, because he shaped the narrative, he came out with the messaging idea of, hey, they're just kind of being weird. He's also a little bit more progressive, so he falls in line with her beliefs. They obviously had a good vibe session, and he has executive experience. A lot of those puzzles are really fitting together, but that doesn't mean that it was a smart political decision. And that's what, and I say, okay, so I want to take a brief second here, because I want to make sure that when I say these next few lines and I read this next article, that you understand where it's coming from. The next one is coming from the Daily Wire, headline reading, Ben Shapiro celebrates after Harris reportedly makes VP pick, quote, massive gift to the Republicans. So the reason I want to pause here before we're just jumping right into it is because Republicans are saying, oh, this is a absolutely horrific move on her part. Why would she do this? It makes no sense politically. Now she's basically given up the ball here that she is a full-blown progressive. She wants a progressive partner on the ticket. And that could all be true, but I think that they are overestimating Donald Trump's ability to lock this down, or maybe underestimating his ability to mess this up. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is going to mess it up. Donald Trump, during the course of the last probably 6 months, when he's realized it was a little bit tighter, he can actually win this thing, but it's not 100% in the bag yet. He has been disciplined. He has been on message. He's gone off message every once in a while. He's gone off teleprompter, but especially after he was put on that debate stage with Joe Biden, or actually exactly when he was put on that debate stage, you kind of saw the culmination of his calmer momentum, where it's, okay, hey, we're going to lock in exactly what we've been doing these last 5 months. We're going to solidify the image when everybody's watching. These first 20 minutes, he was very calming and posed. He kind of started to drift towards the end, especially with the golf quote. But then after that debate completely went in his favor, he was kind of chilling. You know, the story was mainly on Joe Biden. Then after the assassination attempt and then the RNC, he could have, really closed it out. He could have stayed composed for the first 25 minutes, maybe add an extra 10-minute capper. No, he went off and did his Trump thing, and now he's right back to attacking like I don't want to say a flailing dog, but like someone who hasn't spent the last year and a half defining the race under very specific terms and feels confident enough that he can get there, but knows that he has to stay on message. He felt a little bit panicked in these last few weeks trying to find the angle to attack Kamala Harris from. So when Ben Shapiro and these other Republicans come out and say, this is a blessing in disguise, or not even a blessing in disguise, just an outright blessing for the Republicans, I want you to take some pause, and I want you to sit back and say, are they actually telling me the truth here? Is this actually a good thing for Republicans? I think there is some argument here, which is the fact that they're not cloaking the fact that they're progressives anymore, that Kamala Harris is a progressive, that she wants these sort of people around her, and therefore it really seems as though to the moderate American that, oh, okay, this person is actually far left. The description of them as far left, which has been overplayed because they did it for Joe Biden, who did have some more left-leaning policies, but at the end of the day, he codes like a moderate, an old-school Democrat. When they've been using that attack over and over and over again, then it kind of loses its power. And then when you have this situation where Kamala Harris is stepping up, she's trying to recast herself, and she could go with a little bit more moderate Democrat from maybe the Senate, the House, an executive from, like we talked about earlier, she wants an executive because of the experience that they'll probably bring. So you could go with a Josh Shapiro who may be a little bit more progressive on some things, but at the end of the day, he still appeals to the moderates with his Israel position. But no, she goes with Tim Walz. So I understand where they're coming from on that argument, and I will give Ben Shapiro his time, but I just wanted to make sure that when we really discuss this, we do not get lost in the proverbial sauce, because that's what Republicans are going to do here. They're like, oh, okay, hey, well, it's obvious now. Everybody's going to be able to see that she's a progressive. Remember, it makes a lot of sense to us media types who have seen her progressive record it makes a lot of sense to us that, oh, yes, okay, of course this code's progressive. Guess what? Tim Walz is an unknown. The only reason that I even knew who he was is because there was VP speculation for the last 2-ish weeks, and a lot of people that I listen to who are not on the right were saying, hey, he's actually in contention here. The progressives that I listen to, who I'm like, oh, okay, what are you going to inform me about this time that I didn't know about or I disagree with? They brought him into the picture and said, hey, this is the guy. This is a guy who is really progressive. He's going to lock down this progressive wing. He's going to make sure that they're not rioting, that the young people are back on your side. And guess what? They ended up being right. Even if I sit there and I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? What's going on? No, 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 no. And then they turn out to be right. I sit there and say, maybe I should have listened. Maybe I should have taken it a little bit more seriously. But I thought she was going to try to recode herself to reestablish that moderate image by going with someone like a Josh Shapiro. But no, she didn't. But that's enough on that part of it. I want to jump to the other Shapiro's opinion. And this is Mr. Ben Shapiro, the editor emeritus of the Daily Wire. And if you didn't get to see his episode today, which I wouldn't be surprised, because at the end of the day, not everybody, especially people who just randomly be stumbling across this, would actually be able to spend the time and listen to everything that he has to say. The Daily Wire did a beautiful little write-up, which isn't actually that long, and it's not the whole thing, but it takes some of the biggest quotes from it. Quote, Shapiro celebrated Harris's choice, calling Walz, quote, a radical leftist who has a long history of insane statements. He also argued that selecting Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro would have made more political sense, but since he's Jewish, tapping the Pennsylvania governor would have enraged the anti-Israel segment of the Democratic Party. Okay. I think that, and he did bring up quotes during his episode, because as I was reading through this, I was like, maybe I should actually listen to the entire thing and understand some of the context. He did provide some quotes from people who were outright saying, no, we don't want a Jewish vice president. That is far and few between. I think he is overplaying how much a certain segment of the Democratic Party would not be okay with having someone who is so pro-Israel on the ticket. Then again, I very well could be wrong. I don't listen to enough progressive podcasts. I don't listen to any from the quote-unquote Hamas caucus, is the going term for some people who are much more in favor of Hamas and Palestine than Israel. And obviously Ben Shapiro is a person who deeply, deeply supports Israel. He has ties there culturally, and he was actually there before the October 7th attack. So there are obviously lots of reasons that this would sting to him when some people are making comments about the fact that they wouldn't want him to be even on the ticket simply because he is Jewish. I think it's a little bit overplayed, but I don't want to spend too much time on that because that's honestly not the main focus. I say that during the episode, he spent probably a tenth of the time mentioning the fact that Josh Shapiro was not picked because he's Jewish. Like I said, I think he's overplaying it. But there is more to fill in here from the right point of view, because we gave you the Politico, the why is she wanting Walz, not having any bias from left, right. For the most part, Politico obviously has this bias, but they were just trying to provide facts. Now we have our bias from the right. Quote, Walz, 60, has moved increasingly to the left during his time as Minnesota's governor, signing legislation that protects gender procedures on children, tightening gun laws, and making abortion a fundamental right. He also oversaw the violent riots that overtook Minneapolis during the summer of 2020 in the response to the death of George Floyd. The destruction resulted in more than $500 million in property damage to hundreds of businesses. And that means that he also oversaw the dismantling of the police department, and obviously they didn't go away fully, but they had all their funding stripped from them after the George Floyd protests, and then they put in that community safety board. It actually unraveled pretty quickly, but he was still overseeing it then. And when I say overseeing it, as governor, that doesn't mean that he's directly getting involved and he's saying, this is exactly what you have to do. But he could have at least pulled some strings and said, hey guys, this isn't smart. But no, he allowed it to go on. And then again, every city has the elected officials for a reason. But maybe you're a governor of a state for a very particular reason, which is to help everybody within your state even if they already have their own elected representatives that represent them on a smaller level, you can still be the voice of reason and come and say, no, this is actually not going to be good for your people. But hey, that's enough on that one. I've given the right side. Now let's jump to the left side. And this one comes from the New York Times. And I say it's from the left side. The commentator tries to take a little bit of a middle road analysis here, but it is the New York Times. They obviously lean a little bit more left. The headline reads, quote, "With Walz, Harris passes on a chance to redefine herself." And this is where I had been speaking about that article, or that idea that she didn't actually recast herself. She didn't pull herself back to the middle. She said, no, I'm okay with being a progressive, or at least having progressive people around me, and letting that message stick to some degree. She obviously sees the future of the Democratic Party as progressive, or she just doesn't have the foresight in order to realize it's probably going to backfire on her. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I want to believe it's kind of a J.D. Vance situation where Trump says he is the future of the populist MAGA movement that I have created here in the Republican Party, and maybe Kamala Harris is saying Walz has the potential to be a leader who is not necessarily embroiled in Washington yet, even though he was in the House. He's been in state politics, or I say state politics. He's been a governor of a state for quite some time now, who can be the next leader of a progressive movement, or at least be a torchbearer for her brand of progressivism. It's a very interesting one, no doubt about that. So this article, let's actually take a second and learn about who it's by. It's by Nate Cohen, and I already gave you the headline, so let's just jump into the first two paragraphs. Quote, "A few days ago, Donald J. Trump said vice presidential nominees have virtually no impact electorally. Quote, by selecting Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz as her running mate on Tuesday, Kamala Harris put Mr. Trump one step closer to being proved right." And I'm going to be honest, when I first read that, I was like, whoa, Nate Cohen, what you saying here, bud? He does sort of moderate throughout the rest of the piece, but it's a very good point, which is the vice presidential candidate. It has a very hard time winning you the campaign. Maybe it brings you a few extra votes. Maybe if it's in a really lucky scenario, it actually flips a state, but that's very far and few between. I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially with Walz. He's not flipping the state. It's already blue. Minnesota is more than likely to go blue, especially with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket rather than Joe Biden. So why would you pick this person? Just answer the question. Kamala, please come out. I already gave the analysis from Politico. I pieced together the puzzle from her point of view, obviously from my own biased point of view. But I do want to return to it, which is, if you're a savvy political actor, which this is the culmination of both articles, because the first article explained why, at least the outside reasons that are being projected and being told. And then Ben Shapiro, in his article and also his podcast, he said, this proves that she is actually not a savvy politician. And now we're coming to the point where Cohen is saying this actually is not going to change that much on the broader electoral scale because she's not redefining herself. So then you do have to ask the question, even if we're able to rationalize her reasoning, why? What are you doing here, Kamala? What are you doing? Sorry, Madam Vice President, please let us in on it, because I would love to see what is going on. And there's obviously lots of coverage, and there, New York Times, all the headlines were, powerful rally in Pennsylvania between the vice president and Tim Walz. And sure, fair enough, maybe they're a great duo. They have the chemistry to get it done on the stage. I'll be honest, Joe Biden and Obama didn't have the chemistry, but they brought in separate coalitions. This is not what is happening. Then again, Trump did the same thing. J.D. Vance is just an extension, if not a little bit further along Trump's movement, and he doesn't bring in a separate coalition. So maybe we're just in the era of, hey, I don't care. I'm doubling down on what has worked for me, and I don't need to worry about anybody else because I'm strong enough on my own. Maybe it is the age of egotism and the death of, and I say death of, but the withering of traditional political thinking. Because the thing is, either way, someone's going to win this race. So now you could say that some of the factors aren't exactly attributable to either of the VP choices, but some people are going to take the wrong lesson away here, which is both of them double down on what made them them, or at least what made some people love them, and they came away winning. And I think it's going to send the wrong political message. Then again, in an age of division and calcification between the two sides, maybe that's what you need. Maybe you just have to double down. You don't try to appeal to the middle anymore. Everybody thinks it's just pandering. No. You double down and you make sure that you lock down your base. And if the moderates vote for you, the moderates vote for you. I don't think that's how politics should be done, because we always want to be appealing to the middle, not to our furthest reaches, period, full stop, because then we're not going to move as quickly in one direction or another, and we're actually going to make sure we have slow contemplative government, which is the whole point of our system. For all you people out there saying, hey, the Senate, the House, they need to get things done so much quicker. Remember, back in the day, they only met maybe once, twice, maybe 3 times a year. And it was always slow. They only got 1 or 2 big things passed. And even then, it would be a lot of contemplation while they were in town. Sometimes it would take them another session to come back after they contemplated a little bit more, made some amendments, send letters back and forth to one another. It's supposed to be a slow process. We just live in an age of instant gratification. People want bills to be proposed and then passed and then put into action almost immediately. Maybe we could take a little bit of a lesson from our forefathers. But hey, I was just really going on too much of a rant there about how this decision from both of these politicians to solidify what has made them special and stick to their base, is it going to possibly redefine politics? Maybe. Or maybe Kamala Harris just isn't an astute actor, or maybe she's so astute she's playing 5D chess and she's going to run straight to the middle while Tim Walz preserves the progressives because he's been getting positive coverage. Honestly, I don't know, because guess what? All of those things, all of those predictions, those hypotheticals require very specific things happening and the data to come out after Election Day to tell us how it worked out. Right now, we cannot tell the future, even by polling alone. But that doesn't mean that Cohen doesn't have some good points in here that I want to address from the article. So I want to just do one. Quote, "Looking back, perhaps her decision shouldn't be surprising. Out of all the picks this century, J.D. Vance, Mrs. Harris, Mike Pence, Tim Kaine, Paul Ryan, Joe Biden, Sarah Palin, John Edwards, Joe Lieberman, Dick Cheney. Only Mr. Kaine hailed from what was considered to be a core battleground state at the time, Virginia. Instead, most vice presidential nominees are selected with other considerations in mind, like a desire to bring balance to the ticket or to add a governing partner, unify a fractured party, or help define the presidential candidate, whether by reinforcing a candidate's message or by trying to diffuse the opposition's critique." So you're thinking here, well, Alex, didn't you just say that they're normally trying to bring in different coalitions? They just made an argument that no, they're not. They're not trying to bring in other states. They're not trying to bring in a part of the electorate that they don't have yet and the moderates in those states. And that is a fair enough argument, but that's not exactly what I was trying to get at, and I think it's important to elaborate now that I'm thinking back on it. When I say coalitions, what did Mike Pence bring to the table? He brought the evangelicals. What did Joe Biden bring to the table? Joe Biden brought the middle-of-the-road corporate Democrats from the 1990s. What did Paul Ryan bring? A little bit of youth, a little bit of the Tea Party movement, a little bit of the more populist, and I say that now he's obviously shifted, but at the time he seemed like a little bit of populist, at least in rhetoric. Miss Harris, she brought, at least in theory, the black vote, but also the little bit more of the progressive vote, especially because of the way she was talking on those stages. Tim Kaine didn't really bring much. He was pretty run-of-the-mill, just like Hillary Clinton was, but then again, he was a play for a state that was a little bit of a battleground at that time. Sarah Palin, she was also a play for the women vote. And then John Edwards, I'll be honest, I know very little about John Edwards, mainly because he didn't matter. Kerry and him lost. Joe Lieberman, he was a play. He also lost, so I'm going to be honest, I don't think he really played that much. I don't think that Gore absolutely needed him, but hey, whatever. And then Dick Cheney was a play for the establishment Republicans. Bush, obviously, he was playing off his father's legacy, and he had some connections, but Cheney was really well connected, especially across some of the intelligence agencies and things like that, and he brought in that level of coalition as well. So there's obviously lots of different things that you can focus on, and I think that our man here, Cohen, is making really, really good points. But at the end of the day, I don't think that Kamala made this play for any of those other reasons. She's not trying to bring in a coalition. She's not trying to redefine herself. She just really wanted a person, or maybe the executive experience, that's fair enough. Maybe that was a part of it. But I think she really just wanted somebody that she can trust there in that office with her and that she vibed with. And whether that's politically astute or not, I think it's not politically astute, but whether or not it will work out for her specifically, we will see. We'll see. Maybe I'm completely crazy. Maybe they end up sweeping the ticket. I think I have a hard time believing that right now. Give it another 2 weeks. There's some more polling out. We have more understanding of how they're actually handling the campaign together, because Kamala Harris hasn't made too many fumbles. She stayed on message. She hasn't been baited by some of Donald Trump's stuff. So give it a little bit more time, and we'll see how they hang out there in the lows, not just, on the tailwinds of the highs, and we'll see how the campaign is going for them. So with all that said, we got through all the negative stuff. Let's jump into our positive article. This one, our Daily Delight, is from Stinger's Hub. The headline reads, U.S. Playful Monkeys makes a splash in adorable video. And honestly, this guy's just sitting on top of a waterfall. He's going splash, splash, splash. He's kind of throwing the water around. Honestly, I wish he was like 10 times bigger and he was on Niagara Falls. It would look so cool. But the point being, if you want to see this cute guy splashing around having a good time, or you want to check out any of today's articles, they will all be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.